Welcome back. We continue with module 4 and it is lecture 18, limits of market-based environmental policies. Okay, so in the last lecture we learned about tools government use to protect the environment, like rules, taxes, permits, payments, levels, eco levels, etc. Now, many economists believed that market tools like carbon taxes and carbon trading, which we discussed in the last class, were the smartest way to solve environmental problems. And this lecture asks actually a very simple question, and or I would say simple but an important question, and that have these market tools actually worked? And the honest answer is only partly, because we will see where they fall short, why, and what else is needed. So after this lecture, you should be able to explain the gap between how market tools work in theory and in practice. Also describe something which we are going to discuss today as a rebound effect. What does a rebound effect mean? The main problems of carbon markets and offsets. It's also an important point to remember that putting a price on nature has always been a controversial thing. And so how can, what can be therefore done beyond market? Are there any other way apart from just focusing on market mechanism? Okay, so then let me take you to this slide, which is promise versus reality, right? So market-based tools came with three big promises. So let us check each promise against what actually happened. So the first promise is efficiency. They will be efficient. The theory says a carbon price finds cheapest way to cut pollution across the whole economy. So the reality, governments under political pressure keep carbon prices actually low. Most carbon prices in the world are very, very low, while what actually it should be, for example, it is below even $20 per ton, whereas if you look at global economist estimates, we need it to keep it between $50 to $200 per ton to stay near the kind of climate we want, which is, if you again look at Paris Agreement, we are talking about keeping it below 1 point or near 1.5 degree on an average temperature. Okay, so that's again another story. What exactly is 1.5 degree? I will encourage you to read Paris Agreement. But for here, you need to remember that we are basically talking about something that our temperature, which is almost reaching 2 degree on an average, higher than what it used to be. Paris Agreement is actually saying that can we bring this down at least closer to 1.5 degree increase and not 2 degree, because having such a high temperature can have catastrophic impact. And one of the way to do so is that through carbon taxes. And these carbon taxes should be high enough so that we are able to reduce the global average temperature by at least where it is now to 1.5 degree lesser. Right. So in EU carbon market, the price actually has even crashed to almost zero. So given the situation, when you in practice or in theory you say that carbon tax can bring efficiency, can help us reduce global temperature rise, but if in practice it is so politically sensitive that government does not like to put a very high tax, because it will also affect businesses, individuals, and overall economy of that particular country and global economy as a whole. So that's the first promise, the efficiency promise, which if you look at it from a reality perspective, it is difficult. Second promise is certainty, that they will guarantee result, that for example, the theory says cap and trade fixes the total amount of pollution. The cap, so the target is always met. So if you remember in the last class, I explained that you put a cap that this year we will not emit more than this. But the reality is that industries lobby hard. The caps are often set too generously, much higher than what it should be to be able to achieve our final goal. Right? So sometimes higher than what farms would have otherwise emitted also. So too many permit means no scarcity, and no scarcity means there is no pressure to cut pollution. So remember, the certainty promises that if you go for these policies, these economic policies, you will certainly be able to achieve lower pollution, lower greenhouse gas emission, lower climate impact. But because these caps are not calculated in a scientific way, rather they are more, decided politically. So they are distributed across too many industries. So at the end of the day, the whole purpose of having that cap is entirely gone. So that is the second promise. The third is innovation, that all of these economic incentives, like I told you in the last class, if you compare it with command and control, economic, market policy seems to provide more incentives for innovation, to drive innovation. The theory says that a carbon price pushes firms to invest in clean technology. But the reality is different. Carbon prices moves up and down too much to firms to base long-term investments on them. Most clean energy breakthroughs like solar panels, wind turbines, batteries came mainly from direct government funding of research and subsidies, not from carbon pricing at all. So what does this mean? It means that while we thought that through these policy interventions, through these taxes, etc., we will be able to, encourage cheaper and innovative cleaner technology, but it had not really taken that kind of a drive yet. We are yet to see such kind of clean energy breakthrough. Instead, what we are still giving subsidies for people to install, or even companies to move towards cleaner and greener energy. So if you look at this in simple word, that market tools are, like medicines that work in the lab, but in the lab it might work very well, but is given to in too small a dose in real life. The idea is sound, but politics actually waters it down. So it's a small experiment in the lab. It may work 100% successfully, but then you try to implement it in a larger situation or in a realistic world, then it becomes difficult to see the results. Now, let us also look at something very interesting, and that is known as a rebound effect, that, when efficiency itself backfires. So here is a puzzle, making things more efficient can sometimes increases total resource use. And this is called a rebound effect. And it happens actually at three levels. The first is direct rebound. So how does it work? You buy a fuel efficient car. Driving now is cheaper per kilometer because your car is fuel efficient. So now what you do is now you drive more, because it is cheaper. Similarly, you have an efficient fridge which lowers your electricity bill. So now you decided that, okay, I can buy one more. So part of your saving is eaten up by this extra use. So you are saving money, or you do need two fridges earlier, but because you had to pay a huge electricity bill, you used to manage with one fridge or used to manage with one car. Now, because there is better efficiency and you can actually afford to pay or buy two fridges, given that you pay maybe similar amount of money what you used to pay when you had only one fridge. So what happened is that because of the efficiency, maybe your fuel bill or your electricity bill remains same, but you got one more additional item to your house. So this is called direct rebound. Then there is something called indirect rebound. The money you save on fuel and electricity, it does not disappear, right? You spend it on other things. And what could be those other things? It could be now you take a flight to go to some short distances, you are buying new clothes or various gadgets, and all of those things that you are buying is actually also heavily dependent on energy and resources. So your total footprint may not fall at all. And finally, which is also known as Zevon's paradox, economy-wide rebound, when the whole economy becomes more efficient at using a resource, the resource becomes cheaper, the economy grows, and it then starts using more of it. And interestingly, Zevon noticed this in 1865, that more efficient steam engines led Britain to burn actually more coal, not less. So this efficiency is like a discount sale. When something gets cheaper, we tend to use more of it. So efficiency alone, again, does not guarantee that planet is better off. To actually use less, we also need absolute limits or change in lifestyle, not just better technology, better efficiency through technology. So this is very important to remember, that there are many instances of rebound effect across the world, where what we see is that the footprint, despite coming up with several greener, much cleaner energy system, the footprint of energy use or water use has not really gone down. Then comes carbon markets. Again, successes, failures, and there are scandals. Carbon markets have definitely grown very large, but they suffer from repeated systemic problems. And there are 6 very important points to remember. One of them is price collapse. That means too many free permits. If you remember, I just mentioned, when you decide that, okay, ideally you should have set the cap and only given X number of permits, but for other reason, what you did was you actually brought the price down and you distributed too many permit. Now you are actually legitimizing some of these industries to pollute more. So, for years there was no real incentive actually for many of these industries to actually cut emission, because they are getting permit now to pollute. Additionality and offset credit should represent a pollution cut. That would not have happened anyway, but this is very hard to prove because many projects would have happened regardless. So the credits represent no extra, reduction, that, you have given them a credit. It doesn't really mean that they would have not otherwise done it. Similarly, there are forest carbon credits, which assumes that trees standing forever. So, for example, if a particular country has, or a particular firm has planted a large number of trees, they get a credit. So, as a return, that is called something like a carbon credit. But that forest may not remain forever. It sometimes dries out. It is cut down when government change. So many things. So yet the credits were already sold and used, right? So the whole idea here is that there are too many leakages. If one country's prices carbon and the other does not, then the factory may simply move to the next door. So global emission do not fall as a whole. So EU may have a very strict policy that, okay, we will not allow more than this amount of pollution to happen. But all the EU companies may have shifted their dirty industry somewhere else. But at the global scale, your emission still continues to be there. And then there are a lot of frauds and double counting. It's not very easy to actually understand how much, credit one needs to get, how much of emission reduction that has happened. It's still not very transparent. And then there is an issue of commodification. When we treat a forest only as a carbon store, we ignore everything else, that it is a home to species, source of water, livelihood, culture. Then pricing one function can blind us to all the others. So you are maybe planting trees which are of no use for that particular community, because their livelihood is not sustained by that forest resource. Neither birds are coming, maybe it doesn't even do good to that area. But just because you want to say that the forest will be a carbon store only and nothing else, then again it becomes a commodification of the natural resource. So, the question that we need to ask is that, if think of offset, like, very often most of these things look very good in paper, but when you really try to implement them, they are too far complicated. Now, should we put a price on nature at all? That's the question. So beyond the practical failure, there is also deeper ethical critique of pricing nature. Substitution problem. One of the argument is the substitution problem, that money assumes everything can be swapped. Destroy a coral reef here, plant a tree there, right? And the value is kind of balanced. But ecology does not work like that, right? A reef and a tree plantation are not interchangeable. Some things are irreplaceable. So that's one problem that we see, that as if you cut a large amount of tree in one area, and then you show that, oh, our forest reserve has increased because we have planted so many there. But is it really same? Is it really similar trees? Is it like something which has been there for centuries? Can you really bring that back? You cannot. So that's why the substitution problem is a big challenge. Crowding out deeper values. If we protect nature only because it is useful to human, we stop seeing its own worth. So sometimes it is also important to look at nature as nature also has an aesthetic value. It is not just because we need it for our own use, this is why we need to protect nature. And if we do that, we actually are crowding out the deeper social, cultural, moral values that are attached to nature. Whose value counts? That is also a very, very important point. Like when we decide that we will price or we will ask willingness to pay or we will price a particular nature, then that means again the rich preferences are more counted than a poor community that actually depends on forest for daily survival. But they have very little money to actually show them that how much do they value. Even if suppose somebody who is earning 500 rupees a month tells that I am willing to pay 50 rupees for this forest to be there, that may look very small compared to someone who is very rich and who says that, okay, I am willing to pay 5,000, but that person may be earning 5 lakhs a month. So this is why also whose value counts becomes a question. And then there is a famous study that valued the world's ecosystem services at, Kostanja et al. In 1997. Basically, they mentioned $33 trillion per year. The number was hugely influential because the precisely looking at those numbers can actually hide enormous guesswork. Whom did you ask? Who thought about it? In what perception did they had about the forest? All of these are very important when you try to put a value to nature. So there are also a lot of politics behind these failures. While the question is whether we can price, but then there are also a lot of politics. What are these politics? Lobbying. You all know that industries that get free pollution permits fight to always keep them. Free permits are affecting no gift from public to actually polluters. You are basically effectively giving them a gift to pollute. So lobbying is something which always happen. Big industries always try to, and that is also one of the reasons why you see that we are yet not able to come over the issue of climate change, because while everybody knows that emitting more is going to create a lot of problem, but if you change immediately from what you are doing today, you will also lose out. But although in the long run you may see profit, but that short-term loss nobody is willing to take up. Then there is carbon lock-in. Fossil fuel companies own expensive, long-lived assets, power plants, pipelines, refineries. So any policy that threatens these assets, that, okay, we are not going to depend on these refineries anymore or these pipelines anymore, then what would happen? They have already invested a huge amount of money, assuming that in the next 30 years, they're going to make profit. So, but if you're asking them to stop running in 20 years, so they lose out that 10 years, right? So that also is a problem. They are already lock-in investment, which they can't do anything about. Then this is a very interesting concept, something that you can study, is called greenwashing. What is this greenwashing? Cheap, low quality offsets let companies claim to be net zero, while changing nothing about the core business. They do something small and then they show that, okay, we have done this, we have cleaned this, we are making these changes, etc. We have put a few solar panels on top of our building, but you still have your glass houses, you still are using a lot of air conditioning. So see, these are known as greenwashing. Regulatory capture, the very bodies that verify carbon credits are also under constant pressure to be generous. Their clients are the ones who are selling the credits as well. So, there are many other such problems where you do not really have a third party, your own, somebody who is verifying the carbon credits themselves, are not obeying the rules. So the limits of market instruments are not just economic, they are therefore also political, institutional, and ethical. Now, this brings us to the question of, so what else can we do? Recognizing these limits does not mean that we should give up on policy, right? It means using a bigger toolkit. First is go for hard limit, like set absolute caps, emissions, resource use, land conservation, like command and control. Some lines must simply not be crossed, whatever the cost benefit some say. This follows the planetary boundary logic also, if you remember that we just cannot let anything go beyond, because if we go beyond, the costs will be much, much higher. Public investment history shows that direct government spending on research and infrastructure has done more for clean technology than price signal alone. So government needs to play an important role by investing, by making public investments on cleaner, greener technology, so that this private sector eventually takes it up. We definitely need stronger institutions, because markets alone will not work if we do not have strong institutions, and social and cultural change, consuming less as a positive choice through education, better urban design, shorter working hours, new ideas for good life. All of these actually matters. How can you encourage, for example, people from moving from vehicles to bicycles? Of course, it's not a one-day decision, but there are many things connected. But can we at least start thinking of these kind of behavioral changes? So all of these needs to work together. It is not very simple. And if you really look at the present situation in our own country, I think we haven't really done much. We are mostly focusing yet on hard limits and assuming that you put hard limits, things would be taken care of. So these are the main key takeaways from today's lecture, that carbon prices almost everywhere are too low and too unstable to actually drive deeper decarbonization. Efficiency gains can be eaten up by rebound effect. Using less per unit does not guarantee using less in total. Carbon offsets suffer from deep problems such as additionality, performance, leakages, fraud. Pricing nature can crowd out its intrinsic value and gives more say to those who with more money. Always remember that. Market tools can help, but only inside strong institutions alongside direct regulations and public investments. Again, some of very interesting essential reading. If you want to know more about rebound effect, you can read the paper called Assessment, the Rebound Effect and Assessment. What money can't buy is also very, very interesting reading. You can read about it when you talk about nature. So some of these readings would make these things even more interesting and intriguing, because these are very, very new topic where we still see very, very limited research. Okay, I'm going to stop here for today, and we will meet in the next class.